Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, and dear digital diplomats, I'm the director of the Center for European Perspective, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to today's event. I have to say I'm very proud and honored for the great collaboration we have had in the process of preparing this important publication. And I'd particularly like to thank the State Department. Matt, thanks for your support and all the guidance along the way. And thank you for all you digital diplomats for your incredible work and sharing your wisdom with us. And I have no doubts that this is going to be a wonderful, wonderful first piece, but that we're not going to stop there. I would like to pass it on now to Ingrid and Micha, who have actually been the heart and the soul of this project. Please, Ingrid, take it over.
Thank you, Katja, for kicking off this webinar. Of course, I would like to welcome you all. Thank you for joining us, for those who are joining us here on Zoom and the ones who are watching us via Facebook. So who are we? My name is Ingrid Omachna. I'm a head of program strategic communications at the Center for European Perspective. And here with me is my colleague, Micha Ilz, who is a project manager at CEP as well. And before we give the floor to our distinguished speakers and authors of chapters in our compendium, I would just like to briefly tell you a little bit about who are we, why do we have this launch of the book. So basically, it's been a part of the project European Digital Diplomacy Exchange, EDI. I oftentimes refer to this project as my baby, but not just my baby. It's also Matt's baby, who's going to be moderating this session. So we've been conducting it since 2017 in partnership with the US Department of State and Slovenian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Basically, the project is committed to increasing digital strategic communications capacities of government institutions so that they kind of like can effectively operate within the digital information space. We are aiming to use digital communications to support democratic processes by providing access to factual and objective information. And we're therefore kind of like ensuring transparency in order to basically restore public trust in government institutions. And of course, our main goal is also to enhance basically regional cooperation. So the countries that are a part of this are countries of the Western Balkans, of the Eastern Europe, Baltic states, and some of the European countries, and of course, US and Canada. So that's in a nutshell. I'm going to pass the floor to Matt Jacobs from the US Department of State. So Matt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ingrid. So good afternoon to those in Europe. Good morning to those in Washington, D.C., and a special good morning to those who are calling in from a little further west in the country, from Colorado. My name is Matt Jacobs. I'm the Senior Digital Coordinator for the Bureau of European Eurasian Affairs, who is charged with trying to address how to modernize, standardize, and professionalize the U.S. Department of State's, at least the Bureau of European Eurasian Affairs, approach to public diplomacy and public affairs in the modern information age, primarily defined by the use of digital communication tools. As Ingrid mentioned, we formed the European Digital Diplomacy Exchange, EDI, in 2017 in order to bring together individuals from across the region to collectively address the challenges facing government communicators trying to operate in this new information age collectively, so that we can learn from each other, so we could share best practice and all advance our skills and capacities in a joint and partnered manner, because that is truly the scope of the challenge. The kind of proliferation and popularization of digital communications tools has completely upended the practice in which governments have participated in since their formation. And there have been implications and consequences of those advancements. Now, some of those have been beneficial. We are now able to reach more people than ever before. We are potentially able to develop a personal relationship with our citizens in a way that we're limited by time constraints, by geological constraints. But of course, there are also challenges that arise to any new benefit. And we needed a group to address this together. And that is the reason why we developed this book. As we developed this network, we noticed that there were not many authoritative resources for government practitioners who are looking to engage in this space particularly, especially authoritative resources that were contributed to by individuals who were actively engaged in this practice area. Yes, there were handbooks and resources developed by individuals who maybe came from academia, or those who came from marketing, or those who came from the think tank sector. But there was a little kind of practical guidance from those who were the ones who were shaping, defining, and crafting this practice area through their very practice. And we wanted to elevate the roles and voices of those individuals, as well as bring connections between those who are looking at it perhaps from outside the lens of government communications. And I think we've assembled a very strong panel here of those who are within government, those who have been in government, and those who are kind of operating and trying to advise us and improve us from the outside. And I feel very fortunate to be able to call all of these individuals contributors to our EDI digital compendium. So with that, I don't want to speak as much longer, as many of these individuals have exceptional insights to offer. So I am pleased to meet them and looking forward to introducing the panelists now. So panelists, please see if you can provide the audiences with 3 to 5 minute kind of summation of who you are and what you contribute to the compendium. And why don't we start with Lauren and Jay.
I'm the first to not remember to unmute. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Hug. I'm the founder of HugSpeak Consulting, and I like to call myself a digital media defender because I'm a big believer in the upsides of digital media, and I've written books on how to be kind in digital spaces, how to be graceful in digital spaces, but I do a lot of community engagement consulting in bringing people into digital spaces, using them as ways of connecting us as human beings, and in this noisy world, we trust each other more than we trust institutions. So for any institution or organization that's trying to reach people, this is kind of what our chapter is about. You have to build trust via social media. And that means building participatory mechanisms and bringing people in to be part of the discussion instead of just talking at them. And I partnered with Jay Anderson, and I'm just going to throw it over to him, who is an actual government communicator and has far more expertise applying these things in the government space.
Hello, everyone. Yes, Jay Anderson here. I'm with the City of Colorado Springs. My experience in digital social media on behalf of governments has been largely during emergencies, mostly wildfires, but also other types of events. And one of the concepts that we covered in our chapter was the idea that there is no alternative source for the communication that comes from your government. You don't have an option for a different city government. There is only one. So that being said, it is a very important role that we play, and we have a responsibility to involve the community members in the decisions and conversations that affect them. But because government manages so many different things, from wildfires or emergency situations to the founding of new parks, all of these different efforts have different styles of communication that would be best for them. So managing those and providing the appropriate style of communication and the right way to engage the community becomes very important. And so that's why for my organization, we wanted to align with some international standards, or at least have a policy for how we would communicate with our community so that they can have expectations that are reasonable. Not every engagement is a direct democracy vote. Sometimes you have to have experts like engineers deciding how big to build the road or how to support a bridge. those items are not up to a vote. So setting an expectation with your community is very crucial to make sure that they understand how much of an input they have and how their input will be used in the project. We could talk about this all day, but that's sort of the gist of our chapter and our expertise.
All right, thank you, Lauren and Jay. Moving on, I want to introduce Charlélie Jourdan from 75%. Go ahead, Charlélie.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen because I prepared a very short presentation on why this article I contributed is interesting, and it's all about technical storytelling. Let me show you what happened a couple of years ago when I first got introduced to that technique. I was actually invited to Portorož in Slovenia, beautiful region, to be honest. And the important part is the Adriatic Sea here, the gray area. You can all see my screen, correct? Yes. What happened at that particular conference, we were introduced to lots of EU-funded projects. I work a lot with the European Union institutions, and a number of projects are getting funding and in the end have to deliver a service for the population. We were actually in this big hotel here, but what happened is a scientist got the chance for 30 minutes to introduce us to his project, things he's been working on with a great number of people for a 3 million euros project, about 30 minutes with people from the European Commission, many ministries, journalists, lots of people who would carry forward his project if he could explain it well. But this is how our scientist proposed and told his story. So I'm going to say it exactly like he did himself. We are EDP at Risk, the early detection program for risk mitigation in the Adriatic. We are a consortium of 13 partners, such as the University of Ljubljana, a company called Cable Inc., the Perceive Project, another university from Trieste, the municipality of the city Portorož. For the last years, we've been building sensors, floating beacons that capture a great amount of data in the Adriatic Sea, such as the speed of the wind, the temperature of the water, the intensity of the rain, the main pollutants in the water, and they all communicate back and forth, all this data to the land, so we can interpret how the water moves in the Adriatic. The proof that our project worked, well, we spent very well the money. We installed 150 beacons, spent 3 million euros without any auditing issue, and we had a great closing event in Portorož with the mayor of Trieste. At one point, I look around me in the room, and what do I see? Everyone is bored to death. People want to go out of the room, they check their phone, they check their emails, do something else. Classic thing you've probably done yourself while you were at a conference, and our scientists completely lost us. In the last minutes, our scientists told us this sort of information. There are extremely strong water currents in the Adriatic. In fact, the currents are so strong that in 15 minutes, you can move by 200 meters on the surface of the water, which means if we need to rescue you, we need to know where you're gonna be and not where you fell in the water. And if there's some sort of pollution, we have about 45 minutes before it reaches the shore of one of these countries, and we need to know where if we want to prevent a pollution. What I often ask participants to my workshop is, what do you think should be changed to make this story immediately more appealing? Make the words less technical, modify the order of the presentation, show more visuals, be a better presenter on stage, or even have a sexier topic. And most people would say, well, put great visuals, but visuals, they don't serve any purpose if the story and the logic of the information is not good enough. That's why we can actually follow a podcast or a radio show. There are no visuals, and still we are very interested. So what happens? Our scientists used a structure of the information which doesn't help someone understand. Why? Because he first started with the brand, which is the 10th step in the actual formula I'm teaching. The brand, we are EDP at Risk, a consortium of partners. Any one of you was interested in that information at the beginning? No, no one. But all our web pages, all our brochures, all our presentations starts with probably 5 minutes about who we are, our framework, contracts, guidelines, partners, founding measures, everything that is not directly interesting. Then he dug very quickly in the details of his project, how the beacons work, but we can't figure out why we're actually listening to that information. At one point, he tells us it's a network of sensors. By that moment, my brain is confused. I can't even follow the rest. So let's have a look if we modify the logic of the information and help someone who doesn't work on that project yet to understand. Let's move it. In the Adriatic Sea, there are extremely strong water currents. In fact, in 15 minutes, you can move by up to 200 meters on the surface of the water. If we need to rescue you, we need to know where you move in real time, so we can send a boat where you're gonna be and not where you fell in the water. Could we rescue you on time by using data and understanding how the water moves in the Adriatic? We created a network of sensors, floating beacons that capture data such as the temperature of the water, the speed of the wind, the main pollutants in the water, and send back this data to the land so we can interpret it and know how the water moves. Not only did we lead the project to completion and installed 150 beacons in the last 3 years, but we also rescued 2 fishermen who were lost at sea during the night. We are EDP at Risk, a consortium of 13 partners saving lives with data. What do you think about that structure of the information? Even if you don't live close to the sea, you can still understand what they did, why they did it, how the project solved a real problem. And that is exactly what we do when we start to understand the logic of the information. We move the right information at the very beginning, and the hardest part for most communicators, move the brand at the end, the thing that is not directly interesting for most people, the reason why you go to the cinema and don't start with 3 minutes of end credits. A lot of people might have found this data online that people spend on average 10 seconds on a video. And so what we say is that if they spend only 10 seconds on a video, it's because they are getting very short attention spans, probably like a goldfish. First, not very nice for goldfishes because they have 6 months of memory time span. And on top of that, comparing people with goldfishes is probably not the best way to help them. What happens is that we try to inspire people at the beginning, but we can't inspire people if people don't understand. And they need to understand in these 10 first seconds, ideally 30 seconds for a video, you have quite a margin, and people don't switch off the video to do something else. Once people understand, they might get convinced. And if they get convinced, they can be inspired. So the whole idea of using a recipe, a formula of storytelling is that you can't make mistakes because you respect a number of steps. Like baking a cake, you start with certain ingredients in a certain order. The 3 first steps helps us inject the problem so people understand and start craving solving that problem with us. They want to know. This is the moment we explain things. Then we move on to explaining the details of every single thing we've done, where we add the technicity, the details, and the technical wording. This is where we layer the details one by one. We can convince people to believe in us, to trust that we provided an amazing solution. And finally, at the end, we might inspire them by demonstrating we actually delivered and have a vision. If we do that well, they remember our brand and who we are, and they trust us. That's the moment we inspire people. So exactly like in that formula, this is my own brand. My name is Charlélie. I'm 38 years old. I'm French. And if you read that article, you will be guided through the entire first step of the formula, the introduction with direct examples. So you can turn your project, no matter how technical and intangible they are, into a story anyone else can understand without distorting the facts and being absolutely clear when you talk. That's it for me.
Thank you, Charlélie. Way to play to your audience with the Slovenia reference, and then to go above and beyond. So thank you so much, Charlélie. Let's go over to Joanne Sweeney from the Public Sector Marketing Institute. Welcome, Joanne.
Thank you so much for having me, and what a privilege to be here among such rich minds. And my message is that the real battle online is attention. There's absolutely no doubt that we can reach anyone in the world. And if we're even looking at LinkedIn, we are only 3 connections away from anyone in the world that we want to connect with. That's if they're actually registered as a user on LinkedIn. So what is happening when the world has got so small? How has it become so much more difficult to communicate? And how can governments step in and actually let their message rise to the top? Because we know that cream rises to the top, right? And we want the truth to rise to the top. So I've been a huge advocate for digital communications in this sector for many years. And in my chapter, I'm promoting the fact that social media can be your friend to raise the voice of truth and to really elicit the fact that the public want to hear from trusted and expert sources. And there's one kind of survey that was done, and this was from a researcher in Canada, and he did an academic piece on negativity online. And that's one of the reasons why governments and digital diplomats are staying away, the fear of being critiqued and attacked. But his research found that in actual fact, the 1% of negativity and those people who are online pushing negativity are sometimes resulting in decision makers and in governments changing policy due to the negativity. But who's speaking to the 99% and who's dealing with the middle ground? And so in my chapter, I'm giving a 7-step process on how you can leverage social media for good and how you can not only get the attention of the public, but move the public into being advocates for your work. Because the world has changed so much that church, state, and big corporate business, those powerful voices are now not the powerful voices that they used to be. And the voice of the public through the smartphone, with the democratization of the internet and the free availability of Wi-Fi, means that our governments need to listen to the public, hear what they're saying, and understand where their pain points are. And I'm also a digital defender, and I loved when Lauren opened up with that, because in the absence of truth on the internet, we are leaving vacuums and gaps for the bad actors to rise. And you know, I work with media and with governments, and the one common denominator is that they're not astute when it comes to understanding how the internet works, how you can optimize your content to get to the top of search engines, how you can leverage social media and win attention beyond 10 seconds. And once that content is what I call just like me content, and people believe that you've spent time to think about what you care about and to inform you what the next steps that you can take, that they will trust you. And so social media can be a friend if you lean into it and understand the mechanics of how it works. And social media can be a foe if you choose to remove yourself. And I feel very strongly that those organizations and digital diplomacy outlets and individuals who are choosing not to stand into the internet and step into be guardians of the truth are part of the problem that we are experiencing today. And so I think this book and this title, created by all of the great minds in this webinar today, is evidence that you have 99% of what you need. You just need to take the 1% of that digital skill set that you need to embrace, and you need your truth to rise to the top of the internet for everyone's sake and to safeguard democracy.
All right, that's very powerful. I'm so happy you articulated that. That is a great message. And just judging from the microphone setup you have in there, I'm just going to assume you have a podcast that we can listen to hear more about that. So thank you so much, Joanne. Speaking of the difficulties of getting on and the need for people to embrace digital, I want to jump over and introduce old friend Matthias Lüfkens.
Hello, Matt. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really honored to be speaking here to you, with you. Before joining today's call, I asked, on Twitter, do we need hashtags? And this is kind of my, I'll try to sum up, the chapter I wrote about the science of hashtags and keywords. It was quite interesting to see some of the responses that we got from my good friend Dante Licona, who is with the International Federation of the Red Cross, who says use hashtags only with purpose for an event or life-breaking news, for campaigns or activation, and for strong communities, such as the BTS Army hashtags. They're very, very strong. And then the question is, do hashtags really make our posts go viral? And generally they don't. Do you really need to add hashtags to your post? Well, probably not. But it's always good to throw in hashtags for a tweet. For example, Twitter did a survey once which showed that one hashtag is good, two are better, but with three the engagement drops. So Twitter is not like on Instagram. On Instagram, you can actually put up to 20, actually up to 30 hashtags per post and 24 stories. So kind of, sometimes it's worth putting all these hashtags out, especially if you have, a location where you have different, where the hashtags are really useful. But quite often they don't really help, kind of making your posts go viral. So it's really difficult to find that right balance and to find that hashtag, which is the killer hashtag. I have an Instagram account where sometimes, actually hashtags didn't serve anything, and sometimes it's the hashtag that drove the impressions to the post. So I really love looking at what works and what doesn't. Obviously on TikTok, hashtags work if you're part of a TikTok kind of a TikTok campaign. You have to use that hashtag of the campaign to be able to be part of the conversation. So it's quite interesting. And does it make a difference on LinkedIn? It's hard to say. But one thing I would recommend is put the hashtags mostly at the end of the post, so they're kind of hidden. And don't integrate them into text because it's really difficult to read. And also, make sure you capitalize multi-word hashtags for screen readers. This is really important for the blind and the visually impaired, who will basically read, and the screen readers will read the words, multiple hashtag words. So this is quite important. Last thing about tags, I think it is very important going beyond the hashtags to tagging videos on YouTube. It's absolutely vital to really describe your content, but then also tags and alternative descriptions on your photos. I don't know if you've realized now on Twitter, all the alternative descriptions, once again for the visually impaired, are now readable, visible for all of us. So it's really important that we describe the pictures and who, what is in the picture, not only who, but what do we see. This is for the visually impaired, very, very important for inclusivity. So that's going beyond the hashtag. So tagging is very important. And lastly, obviously, if you post videos, make sure that you have closed captions enabled. Closed captions, not the hard-coded subtitles, but basically the soft subtitles, which you can add to Facebook, to LinkedIn, to Twitter, and obviously to YouTube with different language channels. So this is kind of, what you need to know about hashtags and tags. And lastly, the hashtag is celebrating this year its 15th anniversary. It was invented more or less, or suggested by Chris Messina in a tweet in 2007 in August, and that was 15 years ago. Really to bring content together on a specific topic, and this is still today its purpose. But don't bet on it. It might not make your content go viral, but it will categorize it in a specific kind of context, and this is what we're here for.
Okay, well, thank you. So we're saying that the hashtag is now entering the age at which it's going to rebel against the people who created it. So let's see how that changes digital diplomacy moving forward. Thank you, Matthias. Matthias is one of the pioneers in the practice area of digital diplomacy. So it's a real pleasure to have you with us back here again, bud. Moving on, I want to go to our colleague and steering board member within EDI, Ilija Zhupanoski from the government of North Macedonia.
Thank you, Matt. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Ilija Zhupanoski. Until April this year, I was working as a digital communication advisor of the Prime Minister of North Macedonia and managing the digital communication department of the government. First of all, I would like to congratulate EDI for publishing this beautiful digital compendium. I really hope that it will be of great use for many, helping to expand the digital strategic communication knowledge. In the compendium, I was writing about crisis communications, lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, and it focuses on the government crisis digital communications, give attention to the collection, the processing, the dissemination of information required to address a crisis situation of a volume of COVID-19. In particular, it discusses ways in which government communication services across the world had handled the dissemination of information at the time of the COVID-19 crisis, available practices to ensure people trust, measures implemented by governments, and key challenges in organizing of the vaccination campaigns. I was writing this article last year in August 2001, around a year and a half after COVID-19 appeared, in the period when vaccines started to arrive in the countries of our region. In the summer in 2001, like we were completely not sure how the pandemic will develop, or whether other variants will develop, how many vaccines we'll need to receive, and so on. So back then, I was aware that the crisis will progress, of course, in a way that is very uncertain for me and everyone else. Together with the Gov's crisis communication strategies that will be undertaken in the continuation. But nevertheless, like I decided to write an article about crisis communications about COVID-19 in the middle of the crisis for several reasons. First, to memorize the atmosphere and the fear that we all faced back then, all the challenges that we had, debates and strategies that were taken in the beginning of the crisis with the purpose, this article to be some kind of memoir of the specific momentum and to be some guide for the government communicators in future dealing with some other crisis, emergency and disaster scenarios where information can really save lives. In the article, I'm discussing the atmosphere and events worldwide with a special focus on the strategy and measures that my government of North Macedonia implemented, where I was directly involved as someone who was involved and responsible for the digital communications of the government during the COVID-19 crisis, together with a huge team of communicators from the government, ministries, and other institutions in the country. Having in mind that during the crisis, things were changing very frequently, the main challenge of every government in the world was to mobilize citizens to take an action against spreading of the virus and thereby protect the public health care system and medical staff, avoiding hospitals to overcrowd with patients. In a case like this, poor communication strategy would cause a failure, resulting in utter erosion of citizens' trust towards institutions and loss of lives. And additionally, in a long run, it could also cause serious economic and social damages. And that's why government communicators had extremely hard job to reach everyone with an effective government to citizens crisis communication strategy, to use every available communication channel to explain with clear messages what is happening, to assist and to calm down the citizens and to inform about the measures of the government that the governments undertook. On the other side, while proactive communication was the main communication strategy, dealing with disinformation in the digital environment was another challenge that the societies had to fight. And especially in this crisis, disinformation showed that can really endanger people and cause death, and that they are a great danger for the democracy and people's lives. In the article, I also explained the collaboration that we had with the social media platforms during the crisis and all the tools that they offered to boost our efforts for the fast delivery of the information to the citizens and the fight against disinformation. That would be all for now for my brief for the article. I really hope that I will succeed, that I succeed to motivate many of you to read it. Thank you very much, and I'm open for questions later on.
All right, thank you, Ilija. I think you did succeed in getting people to motivate. It's a very interesting topic, and it's certainly one of the events that I think kind of served as a progenitor of a significant re-interest in the field of digital diplomacy, so your reflections are going to be highly valued. All right, and for our last panelist, last but not least, I should note, I want to introduce another one of our old friends, Roman Osadchuk from the Atlantic Council. Go ahead, Roman.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. So I co-authored an article of how to deal with disinformation. So I co-authored it with Jakub Kalensky, my colleague. So in the article, we discussed the origin of the disinformation problem and argued that it's actually a pretty old problem, but now it intensified simply because of the media landscape changed, the habits of consuming information changed. So we briefly discussed what is the main causes of the disinformation thriving now. So it's like 24/7 news cycle when people consume news basically anywhere at every time, but at the same time, they could create a parallel universes for themselves. So like read their news that they want anytime they want. Also, the over focus on the speed rather than the quality of news. So this is also like contributed to this problem. And after that, we described, basically mentioned the information disorder, this great and seminal work. So discussed the different types of false information. So that fake news usage is not actually recommended, and it's better to use mis-mal and disinformation. So we describe what they mean, what type of information like falls into these different categories. Then we discussed some psychological things that actually helped spreading disinfo and actually erode trust in institutions. So why it is so effective. And finally, we discussed some possible cures that might be actually ahead of us, how to fight disinformation. So there is a thing called 4 lines of defense. It was like Jakub's original theory. So basically, the first line of defense is documenting the threat. So basically, we need to understand the baseline for the disinformation. So is it effective or not? How many people consuming it? How many people got persuaded by it? So we need some basics and actually documenting the things that we want to fight against, right? The second one is to raise awareness. It's like the next step. We need to actually to reach different stakeholders and explain that this thing is actually harmful. It erodes trust in our institutions. It actually erodes democracy itself. So we need to be knowing about this problem. The third step is repairing weaknesses. So every society has some divides and has some weaknesses, some problems. There are no ideal societies whatsoever. So the governments and people also should actually work on making those divides less polarizing, less effective, and actually mitigating them. And finally, there is a thing that there should be the governments probably should limit, constrain, or punish information aggressors, right? So if the first 3 ones are actually focused on the victim side of the disinformation, the last one is actually on the punitive side. So basically, there are both non-legal and legal steps that might be there. So the non-legal is basically ignoring some disinformation media and outlets, not inviting them to the great events and providing them platforms, or just basically name and shame the outlets that spread disinformation. And the legal ones is basically sanctions against specific propagandists that actually some European countries already done against Russian propagandists, or also banning some media, which is also actually the case as of now. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Roman. All right, now that we've done with the introductions, we're going to move into the question and answer portion of today's event. Just up at the top, I just want to note that we are monitoring the chats in the Zoom as well as on Facebook Live, and we really are encouraging audience participation. We know that all of you have made sacrifices with your time to join us today, so we want to make sure that your questions and your needs are met. So please propose any chat or any questions into the chat features of those respective platforms, and Ingrid and Miha will make sure that I see them, and we'll try and pepper them in between some of the questions that I have for the audience, so you guys can direct this conversation and participate in this conversation, mirroring the spirit of digital diplomacy. For panelists, we're going to try and get I'm going to ask you a few questions. If we can keep our answers to 2 to 3 minutes, and then, offer some room for 1 to 2 minute rebuttals or contributions from additional panelists, that'll allow us to kind of move through quickly and make sure everyone gets represented. So first one, I like to do a lightning round question to get everyone comfortable with answering difficult questions on the spot. So I'm going to ask you very quickly in 1 sentence, so very concisely, what is the greatest barrier between governments and excellence in digital public affairs and digital public diplomacy? So first one up for that one, Ilija, what do you think? Oh, Ilija, I think the mute button is the greatest barrier between diplomacy and excellence in digital diplomacy.
Definitely. Okay, I cannot limit to one barriers. I can say that the disinformation is a really huge challenge these days, because it's taking the truth out and trying to serve another truth, which for the society is a huge challenge to present to people what is the right truth. So if I need to give one example, then I would give this one, that especially the COVID crisis showed that it's a huge challenge.
Okay. Roman, what do you think is the greatest barrier between governments and excellence in digital diplomacy?
So far disinformation isn't the option, so I need to answer something differently. I would go for the distrust that actually disinformation actually brings. So distrust towards the governments. We see this actually, this trend is on the line for multiple years. So there's like trust barometer made by Diplomat, if I remember correctly, and this trust is like falling constantly for years as of now. And if it actually will save its base, I think that there would be a great problem when people will be, a lot of people will distrust in their government. So any communication would be actually put in vain simply because people will not be believing it when acting up on it.
All right, Matthias.
I think it's basically fear of the beast, that many governments and ministries, international organizations are still, too hesitant to explore and to experiment, I think, and that is often comes down to the executives, who are not fully behind it personally, maybe because they don't understand the nature of the beast.
All right, perfect. Joanne.
I'm going to go with Matthias and say you can't manage what you don't understand, and a fear of being called out at such a senior leadership position and not understanding new media when you're highly skilled in traditional media, and going front of screen with journalists might make you look like some sort of a fraud. And perhaps your younger juniors have more knowledge than you, and maybe that's something you're not comfortable calling out, but it is that perhaps lack of self-awareness and skill set that is causing that fear. And then we have paralysis and doing nothing.
All right, Lauren and Jay, what do you guys think?
I'd say the dehumanizing nature of bureaucracy, that people in government sometimes forget or don't remember when they enter the doors of work what it's like to be a non-government person. And so there's just a disconnect between the policies and procedures that seem so normal for your everyday life when you're a government employee or diplomat, and that make no sense to the average citizen without a lot of translation and explanation.
I'd say the opposite side of that coin is an addiction to authority. to being the authority and having the truth, and the concept that all we need to do is convey this truth that we own to the public. It's an outdated style of communication, and it's harmful. It holds us back.
All right, and Charlélie.
Well, I'd say I started my career at the European Parliament. It took me 3 years. That's the equivalent of the Congress in the US. It took me 3 years to understand how it worked, and I had a master's degree in the field. And what I would say is that most people explain how you do the work and how we are structured internally, which is only interesting for people working already with the institutions or government, while we should focus on explaining what it is for people in the service we offer. And that would definitely make them much better consumer of that service, and information is included in these services. So don't assume people know anything about the institutions. That's our job. Their job is simply to consume the greatest products we can build for them.
Okay, so noticing a very strong theme here of a fear, a lack of understanding, and the potential for that to cause distrust, which then causes fractures in society that allow disinformation and other things to take root. So, but I think that is something that we might be able to explore here. So, I mean, particularly for Lauren and Jay, for Laura, sorry, Lauren's my sister's name, so I'm always going to default to that. So I apologize like significantly in advance. It's going to happen the rest of today, just promising you. So for Laura and Jay, I mean, your article talked about particularly the participatory nature of digital diplomacy and the role of participatory communications in trust building. So, you know, Roman talked about the distrust in institutions, and governments are not necessarily accustomed to, two-way communication that is facilitated through, and not even just facilitated, but is really championed through digital diplomacy means. Do you feel that governments who perhaps engage in digital diplomacy could use this two-way communication to foster that trust? And if they are not used to, say, engaging in that addiction to authority, as Jay mentioned, and really being the ones to direct it, does that actually undermine trust if they're trying to engage in digital diplomacy but not committing to, holistically to the values and to the modalities that the users are expecting on that platform? And let's go for like 2 or 3 minutes on that one.
Yeah, okay, I'll get us started. Yes, I think if you're proposing to engage in two-way conversation with your community and you're not prepared to use that back and forth to inform your decision-making, then there is that is a lack of integrity. And your project, your effort, your desire to build trust will all be damaged by engaging in a way that is not genuine. For us, as in my government and in my communications practice, we were tired of having our community members be dissatisfied with our efforts. So we decided to engage in a genuine way.
I got 2 upstairs. Don't worry about it. It's always a hazard.
So what we did was grab we looked around for the best international standard for how to conduct public participation, and we decided we were going to jump in with both feet. So we started aligning with the International Association for Public Participation, called IAP2, their standards for how to do this type of work. And it's grown. We developed a local and then regional regular meetup of individuals who conduct public participation, mostly digital, because it's been a digital world for the last couple of years. So we've developed a practice of engaging our community members in intentional ways that align with an international standard, so that we're not just making it up as we go per project, because that provides a really inconsistent and unsatisfying experience for our community members. I could talk forever about that, but Lauren, did you want to add any color or?
I would just circle back to something you said at the introduction, Jay, that when you invite participation from your citizens, you have to put parameters on it. Because if you're not willing to consider certain types of feedback or a certain option is just not viable, it can't be on the table. And so you have to put those like guidelines in place. And it's an education process, because we know how to interact as citizens in our own ways in these digital spaces, but we don't actually know how to be digital citizens. Nobody's taught any of us how to participate in our governments in digital ways. And so the ways that we participate with our favorite brands or our favorite influencers might be totally different than the way that we need to interact with our government. But somebody and here's my cat, but somebody has to lead that education process. And I think, to the extent, and I know this is challenging and I am not a government communicator, that we can be co-learners in how to do this together, and that the government can invite that kind of collaboration of, hey, let's build this digital space, this digital community together, the better off we'll all be. But I know that there are limitations and challenges with that. So I would leave that to those of you who have to implement these policies to expound on that.
I would say one thing to bounce off of that, Lauren, would be this is a time for humble leadership. This is not a time for I'm the leader, follow me. This is a time for I'm put in a position to facilitate our community to move to something better, and that's where. And so I'm going to invite everyone to the table and set the table in a way that allows us to have productive engagement, as opposed to you elected me and now I am going to tell us what we're going to do.
Okay, thank you. Do any of the panelists have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just come in there, and just to add on what Jay has said, is that, you know, leaders have to lean into the comments. That's where the gold is. The mindset is post and go. So let's push and broadcast our information, then let's move on, and hopefully maybe we'll get great reach and engagement. But the beauty of the citizen voice is in the comments, and very often by leaning into the comments, it can positively reshape your communications. And chiefs of police do this very well. They'll host a monthly live stream where they'll use the hashtag ask your chief, and they'll curate the public's questions over the previous 4 weeks, and then they'll also answer them live. And showing up in a truly authentic way is the only way right now in today's fast-paced digital age to really get that trust. So we need humans. Jay's absolutely right. We need humans to show up.
Okay, well, thank you. I just want to say, I think, you know, as no one has told us how to be digital citizens online, I mean, there is just as I mentioned at the outset, a lack of information on how to be digital public servants online. I mean, I think we're starting to attract attention by allowing our cats to walk in front of our cameras, or to have our dogs there. We do know that the internet loves and cute furry animals. So I think you two are leading the way in that space. So thank you for your contributions. If I could kind of like add on top of that question, Joanne, I have one for you. And that is like, we have had, you know, you mentioned in the outset of your discussion that we have this lack of understanding amongst leadership in terms of how to communicate. And you just said that we need humans to really show up. So many of us were actually at an event last week or 2 weeks ago that focused on primarily on digital disinformation. And there are a number of conferences that focus specifically on digital disinformation, which leads me to believe that perhaps are we focusing too much on the negative sides or the negative consequences of the digital environment in which we're operating. And do you think that we risk, by focusing so much on the negative components of digital diplomacy, that we are setting a hindrance for ourselves rather than setting up events where we can pursue productive solutions and productive avenues to figure out ways to succeed in this space?
Yeah, that's a really good observation, actually. And perhaps I'm guilty of over calling out the negativity. And there are solutions to the interrupting the spread of disinformation. So yeah, I think we all have a responsibility to lead by example and sharing our knowledge openly and freely, and really being wing women and wing men and wing partners to those who are now having to step up. And, you know, social media and digital comms is being layered upon staff within government as new tasks. I mean, it's often not even on their job specification, but they're like, well, now you have to communicate, and you can't just learn that overnight. I mean, I used to be a broadcast journalist, right? So stepping into the digital world isn't that fearful for me, because I know how to check my sources, double check them, triple check them, and make sure that I have accuracy on my side. And of course, I was trained how to go live. So I'm in a natural habitat. Also, you're asking a cohort of people who were told for centuries, do not speak to the press, do not speak to the public. You are not our spokesperson. This needs to go through our media and press team, and you are not our spokesperson, to suddenly going, hey, will you be advocates for us? And will you like amplify our great work online? And somebody has missed something in between. And I just think that in between is offering your team CPD accredited skills that can lead them to better career progression, that can give them the confidence that they need and the competencies that they require to stand out online. Because let's face it, everybody's afraid of getting sacked or being called out by their manager and hauled into HR to say, what are you saying on the internet? You need to retract it. And so we are just succumbed by fear, and again, looking at what goes wrong online as opposed to what goes right. And you know, I've had this conversation with Miha and Ingrid, and, you know, we've been watching what's been happening in Ukraine. And if you want to see leadership in action, all you need to do is open up your smartphone and look at President Zelensky and see what he is doing as a leader. And now you have the world's leaders wanting to stand beside him and be photographed. And that is no accident, because they want to be part of what he has built in terms of being able to communicate a story really, really well and to be authentic. And so, you know, there's a lot to do, but it needn't be so difficult. And so, yeah, I think we need to maybe lean into the solutions, and quite simply, it's skills. It's digital skills that allow us to communicate online on the internet through a smartphone. But yeah, we need to be a bit more positive, I guess, with our problem-solving offerings.
All right. And I actually, for the rebuttal, I definitely want to give Matthias an opportunity to weigh in on this, as given he has been trying to advocate and educate governments for a significant period of time. So Matthias, if you have just a minute or two on this subject.
Look,
as well.
I couldn't have said better. You know, Joanne, you know, put it clearly, she told exactly the persons we have to follow nowadays is Volodymyr Zelensky. You know, I always now say, let's do a Zelensky, you know, kind of, you know, get our leaders to take matters, take the smartphone into their own hands, and, you know, basically be authentic, you know, tell your story. And this is, you know, this is absolutely vital. But it's not only Zelensky, actually, it's the entire Ukrainian leadership. And they didn't just start since the Russian aggression. Zelensky has opened his Telegram channel just shortly after being elected in 2019. And also Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, he is going on, you know, Facebook lives with his community, updating, you know, Ukrainians on the foreign policy goals of Ukraine way before the aggression. And also, you know, there are other leaders which are really stars to follow. Is one of them obviously is the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern. She is basically after hours, you know, sitting at home on the sofa, you know, whipping out her mobile phone, going live either on Instagram or Facebook, and just basically in simple words explaining, you know, her recent government decisions. She did obviously do the official press conference during the day, but then in the evening, she's really chatting with her community. And that is just it's so great to see, you know, young leaders, a new generation of leaders who are understanding the power of social media, and who can do it without, you know, many advisors, without, you know, scripted texts. So, you know, I'm really happy to see that more and more do it themselves. Obviously, there was the former US president who kind of, did it also by himself, but unfortunately not, not as we would have liked, I would say. But in general, it's great to see leaders, taking matters into their own hands.
All right, thank you, Matthias. Anyone else have anything to add on that real quickly?
I think Joanne's point about empowering government employees is super important here, because when you look at what's going on in Ukraine, there's no way there were meetings right when everything was happening that said, hey, everybody pivot, and now let's start talking about what we need to do. It happened instantly, at least from an American perspective. Of all of these channels immediately switched to putting out information about what was going on. And that is not a top-down leadership approach. That is a horizontal or empowering leadership approach. And so when you have so many channels and so many voices, every government employee is one of the most valuable assets you have. And if you can't trust them to be communicating on government channels, you have a different problem. It's not a social media problem. It's a training and onboarding and a totally different process problem.
I would add for the Ukrainians, they had the Minister of Digital Transformation, who has really kind of pushed, the digital transformation, and the Telegram channel, which was here, switched after the aggression to basically to be called now Ukraine Now. It's available in 20 different languages. So there was some kind of, it didn't just come bottom up. There was some kind of leadership from the top.
Well, thank you all. So that raises some interesting questions about empowering government authorities to tell the necessary stories that they have to. And I think the panelist knows who's coming up next, but just ahead of that, I want to keep our promise to our audience to ask some audience questions. So the first one came up is, how do we get the publications that are mentioned here? Very important. I should have led with that. My bad. This is the release of it, but we will have the PDF available to you. So you will be seeing that online, both through the Eddy website, our LinkedIn, our social platforms. So the PDF will be made available to you all there, free to download. So please check it out and make some time to read some of the great articles that are being represented by some of the contributors here, as well as some contributors who are unfortunately unable to make it for today's panel. And then another question we have from Sophie, just real quick, I think we can all recommend a few solutions here. But Sophie is based in New York and is looking to figure out how to get a master's degree in digital diplomacy. So just real quick, know of any master's programs in digital diplomacy, or do you know of any degrees that might have a concentration in digital diplomacy? Look at you, Matthias.
Oh, right. Look, I'm not too sure for the US, but I would definitely recommend taking classes with our friend Jennifer, the Oxford Diplomat. She was supposed to be here. Follow her on Twitter at Oxford Diplomat. I wish I could take courses with her at the University of Oxford, but of course that's in England. So in the US, I have to pass. I don't know who is doing special. I think the University of California does with our friend Jay, doesn't he?
Yeah, I was going to say the University of Southern California has a great kind of public diplomacy degree in which you can get a concentration in digital diplomacy, or you can kind of shift your studies to that area, while the master's degree itself will be in public diplomacy and public affairs. Tufts also has a pretty decent program. I think it is still one of those practice areas where it's emerging. I know Arizona State is also looking into something along those lines. They've contacted me about that. So I believe it is probably still a degree that you have to find a concentration for, and you have to build your own concentration in that. So it's probably more interdisciplinary. So it might be a public policy degree, it might be a comms degree, it might be a government or international relations degree, but then you can really kind of tailor it to allow yourself to concentrate in in digital diplomacy. But I also see that you added me on LinkedIn, Sophie, so I will be able to follow up with you on there if I come up with any new ideas. So okay.
Matt,
and
if I could
jump
in on that, I much the same way that you can learn how to change your car's wiper blades on YouTube, or what, the sort of democratization of knowledge and what we're talking about here. There are a lot of great individuals to follow on different social media to take part in these discussions as this field of practice emerges, and before it's formalized into a concentration under an MPP or an MPA degree. They're like, follow the individuals who have contributed to this compendium and follow who they follow. And soon you'll find yourself in the discussions that are defining this field. So I would say, I don't know, I don't have a master's in digital engagement, but my master's of public administration informs what I do. But you could definitely get to this via a number of different formal education routes, or just jump in and start learning and start taking part in it.
Go ahead, Joanne.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So I know that the University of San Francisco has my book on their text in their, I think it's a degree in nonprofit marketing, because it kind of speaks to that. And Sophie, and I'm not going to do a shameless plug, but because you've come up, I have accredited programs in digital communications for government, and I'll give one of those to you for free. So if you want to connect with me, you can come along and have a look at it. But I think the panel is right. I think academia just hasn't caught up with what is happening in industry, have tried to create something, but I'm sure it's coming in the pipeline.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I think is really important, Joanne, you're a former journalist, I'm a former journalist, it's kind of that communication skill has helped me, to be more comfortable in front of a camera, doing, podcasts and so on, just communicating on Twitter as headline writing, and in a way, so it's kind of, maybe just traditional journalism, J schools are really good, as long as you're open enough, open your mind to other new channels, be it TikTok or Snapchat or Instagram, obviously Instagram stories. So I think this is really kind of never, stop exploring new channels. That's what I would say.
All right. Well, Sophie has since responded to the chat and says, thank you so much for all this very helpful information. I feel that Sophie feels seen right now, and is hopefully on the path to researching all those resources that have been outlined. And yeah, I echo Matthias, definitely get in touch with Jennifer Cassidy as well. But Charlélie, your chapter is something that I've recommended for my leadership, who I believe is also lurking somewhere in this chat, and I think was really, really impressed with your work. But it raises a really conceptual issue, in that governments were not, there's a degree of storytelling in what we do, but the environment was different in a manner that we didn't really have to rely on it. We were more information sources, and we had this kind of assumed authority and credibility and relevancy that is not necessarily assumed in today's information environment. And I believe storytelling is a conceptual kind of shift in the work that we would have to do if we're looking to build that credibility and relevancy again. But what other conceptual changes do you think were precipitated or necessitated by the kind of pivot to this more network-based digital, user-created and user-curated information environment?
Well, I'd say the first thing is that expertise has really came from the rest of the population as well. There's a growing expertise where you would take, most politicians are not capable of understanding how the world works because it's too complex. So if you look at an engineer in a certain field, he would probably be a better advisor on certain policies than any politician. When I worked at the parliament, I had to analyze 20 law proposals per month, and about 50 amendments were tabled for each proposal. I was alone in the office. My brain cannot absorb that amount of details. And so who do you rely on? Lobbyists, who might compress that information much faster in a smaller format. or eventually some services within the institution that would advise us. But I couldn't decide. So I had to give recommendations to a politician who couldn't understand as well and just had to respect a certain voting list and instructions. What happens now, if I have to, I don't know, plan the restructuration of the transport system in my city, I'm probably better off asking taximen, delivery services, people who use the road every day, a mother at 8 o'clock in the morning who brings her children at school, than asking a politician who's been spending most of his time in an office. So what happens is that the expertise from the people and from people who work in this field is there. It's massive. What we are not very capable of is tapping into that expertise and have the humility. So some people mentioned that humility of saying, hey, I can't understand that topic. I need these people who are direct practitioners of that field because they use it every single day, like this mother who bring her kid at school. So what happens with storytelling is we are not telling stories about things we don't do or distorting the facts. We are showing what we are actually good at, which is in most governments, centralizing information, making recommendations that can go through the entire system, institutional system to be a law in the end or an investment policy. That's what we're good at, centralizing that information and giving recommendation. But where do we source the data? Where do we source the expertise? We have to be extremely humble with that. And I think that's the moment where we need to tell people really clearly, this is a collective effort where we have millions of brains in the same country, and the number of people who've been spending time in the administration are good at administrating things. That's in the name. Like in the parliament comes from parler in French, which means speaking. So they are good at speaking, not at doing the work. That's in the name as well. So I at one point, I think that humility will build a better society in the almost immediate future, because you have countries like Estonia who's been very active in tapping into that knowledge. But that's where stories just help people realize what we're good at and what we're not good at, and we're telling the truth so they know where their space is. That's what I would say. It's really not about announcing stuff. It's about showing what we do and let people enter that game with us.
Thank you, Charlélie. Do any of the other panelists have any ideas on like what kind of like radical conceptual reconceptualizations of her work are necessary to succeed in a digital information environment?
That everything has to be scripted?
That's a huge one. That's a big one. Yeah. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, it's really hard to be authentic when you are tied to a script. And I know authentic is an overused buzzword, but if you look at those leaders that have achieved that social media storytelling capabilities as a natural feat, even Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand, you see her. I've seen her with her child in her arm in her kitchen, just going about her business and saying, listen, I took 5 minutes out from putting my daughter to bed because I wanted to update you on an important meeting that we had today. And she speaks as if she's speaking to you or I. It's a real conversation. And so we're trying to untrain and undo all that we thought was really polished communications practice. And if you think about even how the social networks are evolving, Instagram was this polished, perfect lifestyle, whereas those that are really commanding TikTok are showing up in their hoodies and, before they have their breakfast to just tell a story in the moment because they're inspired to do so. And so, yeah, I think we're kind of unteaching what we thought was good comms practice. And that's scary for people.
Couldn't agree more, which is, leads into another question for Ilija. Ilija, we're talking about telling stories and the necessity of communicating with people. You wrote your chapter on what is possibly one of the most difficult crisis communications scenarios we've faced in recent memory. And of course, you were also the first one to talk about that the greatest threat to digital diplomacy is disinformation. So I'm curious to see, when you were dealing with your work and communicating during the COVID-19 crisis for your government, How did you balance out telling the story of what the government was doing and what it believed and fighting against disinformation? How did you determine what was most useful at what point in time, and how did you strike that balance?
Thanks, Matt. It's a great question. Well, I share an opinion that every single information needs to be proactively communicated with the citizens. Everything that's important in order to avoid that information to be disseminated to the public from some other side, and that to create another communication crisis. So proactively sharing information is very important. And regarding the dissemination, regarding the disinformation, the debating, not every disinformation deserves to be debunked, since it can give disinformation more space and attention and might reach more people and cause a bigger problem. So how to balance? Measuring the credibility of the source that is distributing the disinformation is very important. Then in the process of determining whether to debunk it or not, as well as checking where this information is placed in the moment. If it's only on the social media, only on Twitter, other social media as well, or maybe it went out in traditional media, which is a huge problem. And of course, on the end, it's very important to measure how sensitive is the content towards the citizens, and how many people will be affected from this information, and then to decide to debunk it or not, and then to decide how to debunk it, which channel to use, to ask the Prime Minister to go in public and to say that this is not true if it's something huge, or to use a Twitter profile of the spokesman of the government or other institutions, and so on. So in this determination process, we use our communication protocol in dealing with disinformation that our government developed in 2008 as a part of our communication strategy. And basically, back then, like for a first time, we created some rules that we can use that will help us to see how to deal with disinformation.
All right, thank you. And actually, I mean that. Oh, go ahead.
May I jump in? The idea of debunking information, especially on social media, is a challenge that we've had during a fire incidents. The one where I first met Lauren was the largest fire that we had ever had in Colorado, and it was threatening houses in our city. And so we had firefighters from all over the nation had flown in, and they were trying to fight our fire. And the community was looking for something to do to help the firefighters. We talk about this in our chapter, but there was a rumor began spreading that the firefighters were thirsty, that they weren't getting the ice that they needed to keep them cool while they were fighting the fire. And so the rumor started spreading that what was needed was community members to buy ice and bring it to the fire stations in town. That was not what was needed. The firefighters have their own logistics program. It's a very professional system. But what we started seeing ice pictures on Twitter and on Facebook of cars full of ice, bags of ice that were being brought and left at the fire stations. Then we tried to directly combat this by saying the firefighters don't need ice. This is not what's needed. It didn't work at all. But what the message then got out was that the ice is melting and the firefighters aren't getting it. So what we need is to provide ice chests, coolers. And so there were community members. Now I saw pictures of car trunks, the boot of a car or the back of a pickup truck full of old ice coolers that were now being dropped off at the fire stations. And we said, please stop, this is not what's needed, but the message didn't get out. We finally found a point of leverage that said, we told our community members, the ice and the ice chests that you are leaving in front of the fire stations are blocking the firefighters from getting to the fire. That's a message that resonated. With that message, it stopped the whole thing. We put out, but finding that point of leverage, as opposed to meeting a message of disinformation directly, instead finding some point where you can actually flip the story on them. It's very much like judo, where we just needed some fulcrum to be able to say, not that, but this. And so for our community, that was a very poignant lesson that I will never forget. And it really just speaks to the strategy in addressing information may not be, or addressing misinformation may not be, stop this now. That's a very authoritative message, right? Instead saying what you're doing is causing this action. And that was a much more resonant messaging. So thanks.
Thank you, Jay. That strikes me as such a, for the three of us from the Southwest, that story strikes me as very Southwest. That mentality of gotta bring ice chest, that's very us. So thank you for sharing. But this raises an interesting question for Roman. Roman, you note in your chapter, and this is something that I've stressed in my presentations too, that disinformation is not a new thing. It's something that has been prevalent in our information space, for as long as we can remember. I mean, one of the first authority figures to warn against the dangers of disinformation was one of the popes, following the kind of more broad availability of the printing press. But why do you think governments are focusing on it now, so much more so than they did perhaps in the past? I mean, you note that it came to kind of broader public kind of awareness during the 2016 presidential election. But is there something about it being in the digital information environment that makes it more of a concerning threat now, where it has greater power? Or do you feel that it is more of a topic of conversation because perhaps we are not as suitable with our current skill sets at debunking disinformation or preventing disinformation online than perhaps we had been in different press structures in the past?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, as you said, disinformation was always here. People lied to other people, since the first, the first minutes when people started talking and learned how to do this, I guess. But the thing is that now it is slightly different because of the multiple reasons. First of all, the cost of producing disinformation is extremely cheap. So that's why the amount of the false information out there is highly outnumbers what is actually truthful on the market. And that's why it's really truth is not that, engaging, empowering some people, right? So that's why some people might go for the disinformation, because it's more entertaining, more interesting, something that you could share more easily, and that is more newsworthy from the standpoint of our old wired minds, right? So this if something is really societally important, I should share and talk to people like me and give them a warning about something, even if it's not true. So that's the reason. Another thing is that media cycle changed, right? So and the consumption habits also changed. Before, 40 years ago or something, the consumption of political news, for instance, was shared experience among millions of people, right? So the speech of the president was seen by millions of people at the same time. Now you could ignore political news whatsoever. You could build up your own political reality, whatever you want. And that's the thing, because people could be neighbors, but they perceive the life around them absolutely differently. And it creates problems, not only political clashes and division, polarization. It creates the problem of such basic things as, public health. Should you wear a mask or not? You could go to the stream of news and bloggers and people and outlets that will tell you that you shouldn't, or you could switch to the other side. This is it becomes a choice, but sometimes this choice might actually cause harm to others. And I think that these are like the main reasons why governments started doing it, because they saw that it actually could bring real problems. And the COVID actually showed it, the problem, and that many countries do not have like vaccination rates pretty high, right? A lot of people decide not to do this and believe in conspiracies simply because they could just choose their media diet and sit on it. Not that like the government has like the absolute authority over the truth, right? But at least it can nudge and provide truthful information. But again, during the decline in the government itself, it also brings another bunch of the problems. So it's a complex problem. There is no easy solution for that. And I guess it's one of the challenges for us, because the challenges for the humanity become more global, and we should at least agree on what are the problems are in front of us in order to be able to fight them. So, and if we cannot agree on this, it actually brings up the weaknesses. So again, that's why maybe like another reason why is this important.
Right. Well, thank you, Roman. And in the interest of time, I just want to give Matthias an opportunity to address a question that I think is really important online. So as we talk about all these things that are distracting our attention, whether it's disinformation narratives or whether it's news, breaking things that are happening, when it comes to government communications and hashtags and kind of like staying on course, do you think there's a balance that a government needs to strike between paying attention to what is happening in the discourse of its citizens naturally, what they're paying attention to? Let's say, maybe not necessarily what hashtags, but what subjects they're following, what they're discussing, versus what they think should be newsworthy, which perhaps might have been a traditional model of how government engaged in communications.
You have to have the finger on the pulse. I mean, it's traditional polls, and now you have social media. You just need to monitor what is being said in the different communities, and you have to build that into your communication strategy. But the idea is you don't want to be too reactive. You want to try to lead the conversation, which is very, very difficult. It's almost impossible. But I think you can only do that by innovating. But obviously you have to the monitoring has been so much it's so much easier now for governments. Monitoring not only hashtags, obviously, but the campaigns that are bubbling up, and so it's very important to be reactive and to change course fast. And maybe if you have had something planned in your editorial calendar, well, sorry, because there was this or that event, let's say school shooting, well, no, sorry, you can't then come up with some happy news. No, that's so you really have to be very reactive, but kind of trying to lead it is very, very difficult. So you have to do it really kind of with your community. You can no longer just talk to your community, talk at your community. You have to, and it was mentioned before by Lauren, I think, is really kind of include everyone as much as you can, obviously, and give them a voice. So the example from Colorado is absolutely amazing, what we've heard here during this session. Thank you, guys.
All right, well, thank you, Matthias. We're coming to the close of our event. I want to make sure that all of you in Europe can head off to your dinners, and all of us on the East Coast our lunches, and I'm sure everyone in Denver can go for a hike or a brewery, whatever it is that you guys enjoy in that beautiful state that you guys have. But before we close, I want to address one thing from our group chat, which is you all seem to have really inspired some people to pursue this as a course or career, or at least an educational next step. We had another question about scholarships from Milhana, who asked about where there might be, fully funded resources and scholarships for masters in international relations and diplomacy. Little outside the scope of my knowledge, but you said that you're from Kosovo. I know that you can go talk with some of our give some of our colleagues at the embassy an opportunity to go chat with them about EdUSA and other resources. British Councils has a few things, and they should be able to point you in the correct direction. But as a closing lightning round question again, with the limited time that we have, I want to ask our panelists to give what is one word, so a one-word characteristic that is necessary for everyone who is either currently engaged in government public affairs or is looking to get in there or is looking to go to school for it. What is a one-word characteristic that is most needed in order to take digital diplomacy to its next level? And with that, I'll first go with, so it's a big question and it's improv. So Jay, one word, one characteristic.
Humility.
Humility. All right, Laura.
Listening.
Roman.
Accuracy.
Accuracy. Joanne.
Authenticity.
Charlélie.
Explain why. It's 2 words.
Okay, 2 words. We'll take it. We'll call it hyphenated. Matthias.
Dialogue.
And Ilija.
Multidisciplinary.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, with that, I want to just say thank you for taking the time and giving us your attention, your energy today, and for engaging with us in a conversation. And I hope you all benefited from it. I know I was definitely piqued by a few ideas. I've got notes all over a piece of paper that I'm now going to have to translate into some more constructive thought. And I am positive that if you were to follow the links and download the digital diplomacy book that we are previewing here today, your mind will be reeling with further questions, further ideas that will very much contribute to the future development of this practice area. And we're looking forward and welcoming any and further contributions that those who have joined us today, either on the panel or as members of the audience, may be able to introduce to this practice area. So thank you so much. And with that, I want to hand it back to Ingrid and Miha for some closing words.
Thank you very much, Matt. And thanks to everyone, Lauren, Jay, Charlélie, Joanne, Ilija, Roman, Matthias, and last but not least, of course, Matt. I wanted to pull up a presentation, but since we don't have any more time, I'm not going to do that. I'm just kidding. I just want to pass the floor actually to Miha, who's been a huge part of this project. Of course, one thing before I do that is just to let you know that this is not a final version, actually. We will keep updating it, adding new chapters. So stay tuned. And of course, we're not just talking about digital, we're also practicing digital. So Miha is going to tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah, just shortly, follow us on our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We also have a blog section. You all who are here already contributed to the blog section. So if you know somebody or anybody who is listening is interested in contributing to our blog, you're welcome to contact us via social media. And last but not least, the publication will be available on the link, which will be published 10-15 minutes just after we finish. So shortly about it.
So thank you very much once again. Have a great rest of the afternoon and hope to see you soon, maybe in person. Bye.
Bye. Thank you again.
Thank you.